live. You're live. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first live stream on this parts work questions table that I created. Just a couple initial things. First, this is the first time we've ever done this. So if any of you could just say hello if you're watching this live and let us know you see and hear me. I'm in my office. Sunlight's beaming behind me. That would be great. Oh, Bridget, yay. Hi, good to see you. Okay, so let's go ahead and orient a little bit. So my name, if you are not familiar with me, is Uri Talmor. I'm a psychotherapist in Louisville, Colorado. I teach at Naropa University. I've been doing that for over 10 years and now do it on and off. I have been using IFS full on over 20 years. I did my level 1 training way back then with Dick Schwartz. And I have a lot of other experience with IFS, but what I've decided to do is create a separate video that just a short video to go over my background with IFS if you're interested in that. So that'll be posted later when it's done. I'll put it in the description below if you're watching this after the fact. And also, I want to create a video that goes into how to get started with IFS. I know at the time of this recording, it's a little challenging to get into a level 1 training, but there are a lot of great resources out there. And so I'll make a video to discuss some of them and let you know my thoughts about those. And there's even other models, some of which I think are even better to start with. I'm going to save all that for the other video, getting started with IFS video. And let's see, we'll do these live streams every week. We'll skip major holidays, so we won't be here for Christmas coming up soon. But I will most likely be here for New Year's Day because I like my sleep. I don't celebrate that like a lot of people do. So I'm game to keep this thing going. And then I want to introduce my amazing wife, Cherie. She is right next to me.
Hi.
And Cherie's going to be helping me with the questions. So as I go through this document, I absolutely want you all to ask any questions you've got. She'll help with the timing of when I get to what questions. And also, if I'm going to try to stay very focused on this table, I am prone to going on tangents. There's lots of information. I love sharing. I love teaching in general, but I'm going to try not to do that for this. But if we come across something and you're like, oh, I'd love to know more about that, go ahead and make a comment about that live chat or after the fact if you're watching this later. And I'll do my best to try to meet some of those needs, some of your curiosities. And let's see here. Okay, I think that's good for the intro stuff. So let me go ahead and share the table. So again, could you all tell me if you are seeing this table like I am seeing it? It says parts work steps. I'm making it a little bit larger for you all. What is that? Sorry about that. I don't know what that was. It's a different window. All right, great. So you can see it. Wonderful. So let me orient you to the table. First thing. So in the beginning of this table, we've got the Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz, main steps. And then over here on the right are the essential questions. Not in any way complete, just to give a general idea that these should be the minimum we have memorized. I think the first step of learning anything is just pure memorization. Not entirely that, but that's an important piece in the beginning. Do yourself a favor, if you're relatively new to IFS, take the time. This table is the bare minimum you should have in the beginning, and obviously you'll start memorizing more and more the more experience you get. So this is a bare minimum. We'll probably start today by just going over this. I think that's probably all we'll have time for, but we'll see. And then further down is the absolute most fleshed out version, pretty much. These are, I tried to make this as exhaustive as I could, but I don't have to scroll down the whole thing.
Where do they find the table?
What's that?
Where do they find the tables?
The link to this table is in the description to this playlist, to this particular live stream video. It'll be in the description there. This is a live link. You always have access to it. As far as I'm concerned, I plan on leaving this up. And then just to orient you a little bit to what some of these colors mean, let me back up here for a second. You see here on the right, work with protectors, work with exiles, and then work with protectors. The first section in green. And this is one delineation I think you find in these steps of IFS. So the first 3 or so steps, you're mainly working with protector parts. This is an incredibly important phase. Got plenty to say about it, so we'll save that for later. And then you want to make sure you're doing this in a certain way before you get into exiles. And then there's a step at the end that is really powerful and important to have as a bookend. You're coming back to the protector parts. Now, if you're sitting here saying to yourself, what in the world does he mean by protector parts? What does he mean by exiles? That essentially means you want to read at least one book on IFS. I would just pause the video, go read one book on IFS. I would start with anything written by Richard Schwartz, then come back, and that much will make sense. Again, I'll make a longer video about other resources if you're just getting started with IFS, but I will say that the IFS circle, and how much of that did you end up doing, Cherie? About half of it. So and I have some other supervisees who've done it. They absolutely love it. There's a lot of demos in there from my understanding. I think that is if you can't get into a level 1 training, the circle, the IFS circle, absolutely fantastic place to start. And then this table and the videos we'll make on it would be, I think, a really great complement to that kind of training. So just say that much about getting started with IFS. All right. So as you can see in the table below the IFS table, I continue with the green and the blue to try to delineate a little bit who we're working with. The green is protector parts, and further down, we'll get to some blue. Yeah, a lot of things you can potentially do before you ever get to working with exiles. So now we got the light blue, where we're now starting to engage with protectors. And you've noticed there's a third color. There's the purple. Purple are steps that you can use for any part. Some of this stuff in purple, I want you to kind of keep in mind that you might want to do a lot of this with protector parts also later. So that is what those colors mean. So let's just read through here. Okay, so the dark green. So you can see in the table, you got this dark green here. That means you're good to proceed. So let's just talk about this as an example. Is this more than you can handle? If it's not more than they can handle, go ahead and proceed to this next question. Further down, you'll see if not. So does this part know how old you are? If not, go to this one. But if it does, or you update the part, then you go to the green one. So hopefully that's clear. One of the reasons I have Cherie is because she is an absolute master of letting me know when I'm making no sense. And in general, she asks really good questions. So I'm very glad she's here. Plus, I just get lonely. So, all right. So green means proceed. Red means address something else first. Pink signifies optionish responses. Oh yeah. So these are let's see if we can find one so I can show you. Yeah, so and or. All right, so let's read here. Let the part know it was not responsible for this other person's care. They were just a child. And or ask the other person if they would have ever wanted the client to carry this. Just to give you a little bit of context for this one. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but just to explain, I think is probably pretty self-explanatory. But the context for this is oftentimes people get parentified as children, and so when you come across that, it could be a really powerful thing to clear up. And so the client speaking to the part from self. Sometimes I'll just cue this. Let the part know, or would it feel good? You can always ask it as a question. Would it feel good to let the part know that it was not responsible for this other person's care, say the mom's care, they were just a child, and sometimes I do these two in this order. First, they're reassuring the younger part that they're not responsible for their parents' well-being, but then it can be also really powerful to go ahead and ask. However they're experiencing mom in that moment, ask mom, would she have ever wanted you to take this on? And that can lead to, just a really beautiful moment of the parent that's present with the client, however they're imagining it or tuning into it, just releasing them of that responsibility. All right, so those are the pink either ors. Oh, and then the last piece here is, let's find one. So the brown says interventions in this color will be addressed somewhere else to be determined. So this table, because again, sometimes I have a hard time staying focused, this table is just all things IFS. I really tried to limit it to that. And I've been doing this for a few decades now. I've come across some other processes that are really beautifully woven into this. So the family story by amazing life coach named Arnold Patton. He was actually one of my father's teachers, and a lot more I can say about him. I'll put out something for this piece, all of these actually. I won't even read. If you want to scroll down and see those, they're like, well, a lot of you are probably familiar with lineage burdens. So that I see as a kind of add-on. So the family story is actually a really powerful lineage burden plus. And we'll get to that some other way, some other time. A lot of things I want to create for you all. But for now, we're starting with this.
I have a question.
Yes, question.
So what's the structure of these sessions? Are you going to be going over one question each session or what?
What a great question, Cherie. So, and actually, if you all can comment, were you able to hear Cherie, not hear Cherie, just so that I know to repeat it or not repeat it? I'll just wait a second for that. If you all could share, if you could hear her voice. Wait for it. There's like a 10. Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, so the answer to that question is I want to get through this as quickly as we can, but without overly rushing. You can see I didn't scroll through it, but it's a lot of pages. Like it's 23 pages here, it says. Well, I don't know where it's taking them off, but this is a lot. This might take us a good amount of time. I say we just meet weekly for as long as we need. We'll do as many questions as we can each time. And I just want to go for it until we get through this whole thing. How'd I do?
Great.
All right. And then I just noticed I scrolled all the way down. So I've learned from a lot of people. I've probably missed a bunch of folks, but you'll see these little footnotes at the end of some of the questions. A lot of number ones, of course, Mr. Richard Schwartz. But then I was a PA for Paul Ginter years ago. He's got some lovely ways of starting off sessions that's baked into this table. I'm not going to go through all this, but if you're curious, where do you get some of this from? Here we go. These are some of the inspirations, if not the creators of some of the stuff that's baked in here. Okay, and I think also this obviously can be added to. So if you all watching this are like, oh, wait a minute, you missed this, you've missed that, send me an email, let us know in the comments, and I will update this and make it more full and helpful. Good? Good. All right. So without further ado, let's do this. Oh, but we're not starting here. I'm getting all excited. I love this piece, but we're not going to get to that probably today. Let's start with IFS. So IFS steps. Step number 1 when you're doing IFS is to name the issue and your identifying parts. So kind of the most obviously I wouldn't stick with just this, especially not in the beginning, and especially not with people who are just getting started with IFS and clients who have no background in IFS. But eventually, if that's part of your culture with them, some of my, funnest sessions, and, it's kind of an easier client to work with in some ways if we're really wanting to do IFS, are the clients who can come in and just kind of tune in and see what they're most aware of. What parts are you most aware of? But essentially, everything in this first step, this is the essence of it. We're unpacking, we're creating more awareness around what parts are they most aware of. In the beginning, with a lot of folks, you might just be using parts language, and that might be how you start. It'll look a lot like typical talk therapy. They're sharing, they're going through history, you're making notes around traumas, of course, that are significant. And around that, I'm always kind of tracking what parts I seem to notice present in the client, so I'm making notes of those. And those of you who are more familiar with IFS, we're naming essentially what parts are protecting what parts. So that you got the protectors and then the exiles. So all that to say, first step, you're just getting a sense for who's available, who's in the room, who's in the foreground, as we say in Gestalt, what parts are in the foreground. Let me just say, for those of you who have a Gestalt background, you could think of this in terms of top dog and underdog, usually top dog, underdog parts. So here you're exploring getting a sense of both. Once you have that somewhat established, they're somewhat aware of their parts, you're talking about them, you are going into a phase of wanting to unblend them from the protective parts, so that they can have a more self-to-part relationship. So let me just name that a little bit. Again, if what I'm saying now doesn't make any sense, you don't know what I mean by self, it's time to read an IFS book. Just pause this, go read the IFS book. But in IFS, one of the kind of revolutionary pieces of it, other models speak to this, but IFS, I think, names it in a really clear way, is that we can experience a different aspect of who we are that IFS calls self. And traditionally in IFS, we describe it with 8 C's. It's the aspect of ourselves that is curious, creative, calm, clear, connected, compassionate, confident, and courageous. Of course, we could use other words to describe it, but those are really actually, that's a fantastic summary of self. And the main goal in IFS, one of the main goals, is to support clients in experiencing self-leadership, basically meaning that they're living from self They're living from a state that has more compassion, clarity, curiosity, as opposed to parts that have, usually at minimum, much, much less connection to that. Parts obviously can express self and can have self qualities, and be self-led. But one of the things that struck Richard Schwartz when he was creating this model, and really, I think he would say discovered this model, is that as he helped clients unblend from protector parts and or exile parts, self came in naturally and organically, and ended up being an incredibly healing force in addressing the parts. Essentially, was the healing factor in helping parts heal, all of which we're going to get into quite a bit going over this table. So all that said, in the beginning, you kind of identifying protector parts, parts that are being protected. I should probably give an example, like a specific example. A protector part, let's say, could be a perfectionist part. In IFS, they talk about managers and firefighters. So that would be more of a manager part that just wants to make sure everything's perfect. And underneath that, and kind of in the deeper level of our psyche, might be an exiled part that believes that I'm not good enough, or let's just leave it at that. I'm not good enough. So we would want to, and the perfectionist part could end up expressing itself as quite a critical part, that actually, unfortunately, creates more of a sense and a burden that we're not good enough. So top dog, underdog. So we want to get to a place where that perfectionist part can relax a little bit and unblend, so that we can attend to the part that learned that I'm not good enough. And we're going to get into it, but there's a whole bunch of steps we can do to help that part heal that identity. Let go of the story, process the feelings that were around when that story was created or communicated from someone else, and then come back to the perfectionist part. And usually at that point, if a younger part doesn't feel like they're not good enough, maybe they replace it with I am enough, I'm good enough, my love is enough. Then this perfectionist part can relax a bit. And oftentimes, protector parts want to do the exact opposite of what they've been doing, which is a little bit ironic. So all that said, the power question, the core question for this step is, let's say I've identified those two parts in the client, and I want to attend to the part that got told you're not good enough, and see how we can support it. If I want the client to relate to it from self, but I want to see if they're even there, I could ask them, how are you feeling towards this part that thinks he's not good enough? If it's earlier on, the client might say, oh, well, he's not good enough. He needs to get his, act together. And so we'll go over steps you can do to help unblend from the protector part, so that eventually you get to, okay, now when you notice how you feel towards the part that doesn't feel like it's good enough, the client might then say, oh, I'm noticing a lot of compassion for it, or I'm noticing curiosity towards it. So this is really the key question in this step. It's your assessment. And this is one of my favorite questions in IFS. How do you feel towards that part? And I come back to this over and over again throughout the session. Okay, next step, contracting. And if necessary, because sometimes just naming the parts is enough for people to start to get curious, to start to feel compassionate, and you can move on to the other steps. But sometimes these protector parts have very specific concerns. And so there's ways to contract. I won't get into it too much right now, but kind of the core piece with contracting is that protectors have very specific fears, very consistent fears, and then the exiled parts have very consistent fears that might keep them from cooperating. So I'm gonna just name those because they're so uh, they're so common. A protector part, essentially, most of the time, they're concerned that these emotions or these parts that are holding pain or shame, it's just too much. It's more than we can handle. That's the first main concern that protectors have. And then the second main concern that protectors have is this will never end. So, and then on the flip side, what we get into with exiles sometimes is that they really want to be seen. They want to be heard. They're oftentimes sitting on a lot of emotional energy that wants to be processed. I love Gordon Neufeld. He's an attachment specialist from Canada who's absolutely brilliant. And so he talks about how all emotions seek expression, consciousness, and then they reach equilibrium. He sees it as a type of energy that you just can't get rid of it. It has to be processed. So it's going to seek expression one way or the other. We don't want it coming out sideways. And so given that, if he's right about that, if those are like laws of emotional processing, the exiles are oftentimes I come across two main concerns they have. One is that they're going to be invalidated. And then the other is that this will be their only opportunity. And so this is such a brilliant part of IFS where it really addresses so much around being trauma informed. Personally, I do not like taking clients out of their experience. I know there's a lot of techniques out there around if the client's getting too flooded. I'll just give one example. You might then I would always check it out with them. We're going to get to that later in the table, but check it out to see if it actually is too much for them, because oftentimes it's not too much for them. But let's just say they're saying, oh yeah, it's too much. Technique I learned in somatic experiencing is that you might have them orient to the room and shift channels. They're essentially shifting a sense channel, and that can be very regulating. And of course, then you'd want to eventually come back to what needs to be integrated. So they call that pendulation, where you're kind of going back and forth. And I think a lot of people view that as like a trauma-informed thing to do because you don't want people getting flooded. What I love about this step is that it empowers me as a facilitator to not have to take people out of their experience. I leave that as the absolute last resort. And oftentimes, all we need to do is ask the protector part, hey, listen, what if it would be possible to help this part with the pain? Would you be open to that? Essentially trying to reassure them that this isn't going to last forever. And if the protector part can trust that, they then relax quite a bit. And then the piece around it being too much, the hack there, and again, we're going to get to this later, but the kind of the main hack there is just checking it out in that moment. Oftentimes in the actual present moment, it isn't too much, but we have parts that are worried that it would be too much, or it might be too much, or, oh my gosh, that one time it was too much. But when you slow clients down and you simply ask them, okay, well, just here and now, is it showing you more than you can handle, or can you hang in there with it? Almost every time I ask that question, the client realizes, oh, I can hang in there with this. It's not fun, but no, I can handle that. Okay, great. Let the part know that. Just let the part know that you can hang in there right now. And there's something really powerful about a part that's been repressing something, kind of doing a 180 and saying, hey, you're not too much. so many of us get that as a message that we are too much. So it's just very healing anytime we can do like a redo around that. And here we have right in the beginning a chance to do that with the IFS process.
I have a question.
Please. So I could finish the exile concerns and then your question. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now then on the flip side, so how are you contracting with the exiles who are worried that they're going to be invalidated or they're being invalidated? Just the fact that no one's going to pay attention to this kind of speaks to being invalidated, or that this is going to be their only opportunity. Exiles can be very opportunistic, and this is where we get into people sometimes getting flooded, and this is some of why. What you let the exiles know fundamentally is we want you to know that your feelings are valid. Feelings are always valid, as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying that as a more meta level comment. They may not make a lot of sense relative to the present moment, why this person's gotten so upset, but Dick has a quote that he mentions often. I've heard him say it many times. When you find out your enemy's secret history, you can't help but forgive him. I'm butchering it. I'll post that later in the description. It's a beautiful quote. But feelings always came from something, or they come from a certain perception. I think it's really important that we never invalidate or gaslight people around their subjective experience, because it's there for a reason. So in whatever ways you kind of reassure the part that, we validate this, we want to validate this, and in some ways, more importantly, this is not going to be your only opportunity. We are committing to coming back again and again and again, as many times as we need to, until we witness, process, make it through all of this. And almost always, when an exile can trust that, it's like magic. They start to relax, and the client's no longer getting flooded. Same thing happens when, when the protector part can say, you're not too much. You see almost an immediate shift. And here's the reason why. In my experience, emotional energy, like you name the trauma, it doesn't matter. Most of the suffering around it and the intensity around it most of the time is because there is resistance against it, because people are pushing it down. And again, this is why this is such an absolutely brilliant step. If you can simply contract around this, everything becomes a lot more graceful in terms of emotional processing. All right, so contracting. We love contracting. If you can't wait for it, scroll down. I've flushed it out in the table. Cherie, you had a question.
I was thinking it might be helpful for you to ask anybody if they had questions to write in the chat. And
yes.
Also,
yes.
I do have a question personally.
Sure. I apologize if I didn't mention it earlier. I meant to. If you have questions at any point, please write it in the chat.
Yeah. So this is my question.
Yes.
So when you are with a client, and sometimes, in the beginning of a session, they come in and there's like 15 different things they want to talk about. So,
yes.
You're noticing, oh my gosh, there's this part, there's this part, this part, this part. You have them focus and, notice the different parts. How do you know which one to do first? Like, is there a hierarchy to this? Does it matter? You just do whatever is the most present?
That's a great question. So it could be a number of reasons why that happens. Oftentimes, and sometimes you'll see this when you're working with a specific part, like an exile, and they just get flooded by memories. And there's a lot of memories, and it's like, oh, which memory am I supposed to work with? That's not quite your question. I'll come back to that one, but that's the kind of similar genre.
Yeah.
Always the kind of the baseline thing to start with, if you're going to be very kind of client-centered, more on the client-centered side, is ask them to ask the parts who needs to most share right now. So they'll self-organize.
Mhm.
And I think with time and experience, therapists can get a bit of a sense of what might be best. But always, either way, always check it out with the client. If you have a sense, you can throw it out there as like a Gestalt experiment, but have the client check it out with the parts. One of the beautiful things about the IFS model that is different from most of the parts models that were around before IFS got popular is that it, I think more than any other model actually I've come across, really respects parts as sentient beings. In Gestalt, in ACT, I've read some really, I love ACT, but there was a coachy ACT book I read once, and they were talking about kind of changing a certain voice and make it a caricature of a cartoon and give it a squeaky voice so you can kind of laugh at it. IFS would never do anything like that. You're literally relating to it as if you're working with a family, like a family of people. Therefore, if that's true, you would ask permission, you would get consent, you would see them as intelligent beings that know a whole lot more about what's going on inside than you ever will. And so you ask and indulge.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Back to the table. All right, first three down. So when you get to the point where, okay, how do you feel now towards the in IFS they call it the target part, the part you are currently wanting to target, essentially to do these next steps: witnessing, the redo, the retrieval, unburdening, invite. Once you get here, and actually I'm gonna do a little caveat. Early in the days of IFS, and maybe I missed something, but when I was in trainings with Dick, there wasn't, for those of you more familiar with IFS, now there's there seems to be a much bigger focus on the 5Fs. Back in the day when we went over it in my level 1 training, we didn't give it a ton of attention. And I think in part, watching Dick work, Tony Herbine Blank was another one of the instructors, Bob Cargill, incredibly, experienced IFS therapists at the time, and more so now. I think they were just really good at having so much self-presence themselves. And I've seen this happen with Dick a lot, where he can get away with a lot of things. He'll just ask parts to go ahead and step back, or he used to do a lot more of that. I think now he's a bit more 5Fs. And we'll get to that later. But the Fs are essentially ways to kind of flush out, befriend, I'm naming some of the Fs, to really create a strong relationship with protector parts before you get into exile work. I have a story that some of that maybe has also been influenced by more of a focus on being trauma informed and not, going too far too fast. And so I think one of the pieces that has come out of that I don't remember learning when I first went through the level 1 training is, let's say you get to this point, how do you feel towards this exile we want to focus on? And the client's like, oh, so much love and compassion. In the good old days, we would have just gone for it. Now, and I really appreciate learning this, even at this stage of my IFS development, I came across this just a couple of years ago. You could still just check in and say, okay, why don't you just make sure, are there any other parts that have concerns about us focusing on the exile, the target part? I don't always remember to ask it or think I need to ask it, but I love that I have more of awareness around it, and I probably should ask it more than I do, just to be on the safe side. If you're new to using IFS, ask that question. You think you've got self to part, but just ask it. Ask it one more time. Are there any other parts that have concerns about, witnessing or getting to the exile? And then address the concerns. And again, we'll get into much more around how to do all that. Okay, witnessing. It's very straightforward. It's just like it sounds. what does this part need you to know so that you get it? Oftentimes, these parts that have been repressed, uh, this is oftentimes the main part of the healing. And remember, Gordon Neufeld, emotion seek expression. That's just speaking to the piece that it needs to be expressed somehow. But when Gordon Neufeld says emotion seek expression and then seek consciousness, he's naming that it needs to be named, identified, understood. Like it has to kind of add to the meaning of who this person is, in a sense. There's a couple therapist approach called Imago that some people I love. Tim Jordan, he runs a camp in St. Louis. He was trained in that. And so he uses that a lot. I think it informed quite a bit of the conflict resolution processes that he supports at the summer camp. Anytime there's a conflict, we try to do conflict resolution and teach kids how to actually resolve conflict. Imagine that. It's really amazing when you have a whole community that has restorative practices. So anyways, he's big on Imago. He's been using it for years. And so there's a pretty, at face value, a very simple exercise where when you're working with the couple, you set it up so that when one person's sharing, they get to just keep sharing until the listener gets to a point where they're, the light bulb goes off and they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. And you would stay with just one side of the conversation until you reach that tipping point. That's an example of what we're going for here. And so, again, we'll get into it more. But it starts off with, what does this part need you to know? And eventually it culminates into, does this part feel like you get it? And you want to keep going until the part feels like the client really gets it. Okay, all that said, the next step, do over, redo. Again, speaking as a kind of a quasi IFS dinosaur, we didn't, I don't even think this was a step back in the day. So when I finally got around to doing a level 2 training not that long ago, and reading the workbook in IFS, I'll go over those kinds of resources in the video about how to get started with IFS. This was really emphasized, and I think a lot of us had kind of created this on ourselves. I've heard it called, as a counselor, the corrective emotional experience. That's what this is. And I think this was from Tony back in my level 1 training. She would say, and then she very well could have gotten it from Dick, how can you be this for this part in the way that it needed? And if it was entirely safe to do so, okay, this gets into more of the redo. So this first question is how I learned it and what I've been doing with folks. Be there for this part in the ways that it needed. Such a beautiful, powerful question. But now there's much more of an emphasis, which also is very gestalty. Let's redo this thing. Like what would this part have said if it could have said anything it wanted to say? A very, very powerful step. Again, not again, but for this step, I don't always do it or get to it. We can talk more about that as we go through the table. I'll probably name that here and there. But if you have the time, good to get to. Very, very powerful. These two, as these are done, as these feel somewhat complete-ish, or whatever degree you get to witnessing in the do-over, the redo, eventually you're getting to these so that you can do the retrieval. Again, another piece that makes IFS unique. I know there's soul retrieval. There's a lovely book by Sandra Ingerman, I think is how you say her name, called Soul Retrieval. So obviously this is a thing. It's been around more, I think, in like shamanistic practices. She's speaking of practicing shamanism in that book. That's what she's speaking to. And IFS beautifully brings it in to this process. So when I alluded to it earlier, when the part feels like you get it, and then the other major piece is the part trusting you. I'll say a little bit more about that, but eventually you get to the point where you can ask, would this part like to come with you? If that stalls out, but I think we've done all the witnessing and everybody gets it, one of the main things I will check out is, does this part feel like it can trust you? And the nice thing about that question is, if the answer is no, the parts can always tell you what they need so that they can trust you more. So that's your follow-up. So what would this part like from you? What does this part need from you so that it could trust you more? And they always tell you things you can do immediately. So that's your next experiment. You do that, and then you can check in. Does this part feel like it can trust you now? And then trust is the bridge. It just is the bridge of relationships, as far as I'm concerned, and it shows up in this work and in this step. So, and we'll get more into all this.
There's a question
in the table below.
You want me to ask you, or?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's a question from Peter.
Thank you for your question, Peter. If this is the Peter I think it is, I'm really glad you're here.
So the question is witnessing a protector sometimes necessary to help it unblend or step back? Almost as if protectors can become exiled and need us to get them before they can soften or integrate.
What an advanced question. I think this is the Peter I'm thinking of. Absolutely. And that harkens back to our previous alluding to the Fs, the 5 Fs, which I should have those memorized for you instead of just being cryptic about it. But absolutely. And that's a great way of putting it. Oftentimes when we stall out here and the protective parts are like, oh, hell no, don't think so. Guess what? You're going to witness them. You're maybe going to do redos with them. And you're going to just keep doing that until not necessarily, and sometimes you even end up retrieving them, because guess what? The protector parts are the ones with the traumas, with some exiled stuff that didn't get fully addressed. So you might, yes, absolutely go into all of this, retrievals, unburdening. And it's in the spirit of, in terms of the big picture, getting the protector to unblend. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but to your question, Peter, I'm a huge advocate of nonviolent communication. It's baked into the table below just because of my background. I think it should be just woven into the IFS training, and you see it kind of reflected in certain ways now. It's baked in a little bit in the Fs when they're asking kind of, what does this part need? You hear that quite a bit, but that's not really NVC. I'll just name the only video I've had time to actually make, is about nonviolent communication on the YouTube channel. So it's video number 1. It's worth watching, I think. If not my video, you can find The Basics of Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I love that program. It's about 3 hours long. Anyways, all that to say, baked into NVC is this one little gem where if you can just, what he calls listening in giraffe, no matter what people are doing or saying, they're saying, please meet this need, or thank you for meeting this need. If we can just put on our giraffe ears and hear that in whoever we're dealing with, or any protector part we're dealing with, name the need for safety that they have, name the need for well-being that they might be expressing, they almost always immediately relax. So, we went into contracting a bit. I actually don't do a lot of contracting these days. And we'll get into it. It's all in the table. I will start off just naming the need that they have. And oftentimes that's enough. And if I want to take that a little bit further, I want to honor how brilliant what they've been doing used to be. Maybe kind of is at times now. And when these protective parts feel like you get them in that way, like really honor the role they've been playing, they become part of the team. So I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. The short answer, Peter, what you're asking is yes, absolutely. And again, you're going to do whatever you need to do here until their game to go to the more obvious exiles. I was going to say more emotional parts, but managers and firefighters, the two type of protective parts they talk about in IFS, can definitely have really important, powerful emotions that need attention, need validation, and need the space to process. Great question. Okay, so let's see, where are we? I'd love to get through this table today. So we might go a little bit long. I was planning an hour, but I think we're going to just see it through. It might take us a little bit longer than that. So where were we? Retrieval, right? Would this part like to come with you? Do you remember, Cherie? Yeah, did I cover it? No. All right. So you've done beautiful witnessing. Now you have so much more compassion for what this part has been holding and has been through. You did some redos. You told everyone to, go fly a kite like you always wanted to. And oh, that feels so good. And this part now trusts you. You've checked that out if you've needed to. And so you get a sense of it as a therapist. And sometimes this happens organically where the parts are like, get me the F out of here. And you're like, all right, great. I have just the place. But oftentimes we're going to be leading that. We'll be facilitating that. And so you just simply ask, would this part like to come with you? This is how I like to frame this. Traditionally, and back in the day, there was a lot of focus on taking parts to safe places. And I think some of that got influenced by EMDR, which also does a lot of parts work. And I'm pretty sure that's just part of their culture and how they work with parts sometimes. I'm okay with that. I'm definitely okay with it if that's what clients are used to doing and that's what they want to do, take the part to their magical land with, unicorns and butterflies and rainbows. Fine. But I never want that to be the final landing spot. I think it's really important. If you have to do that as a stepping stone, great. Let's just get them to a safe place. But then I would keep working with the part if needed in whatever ways, so I can bring the part to the present moment with your client. The client's present moment self is the safe place. Like that's the ultimate safe place for parts. Some of that for me comes from my experience with the Course in Miracles, studying that for a long, long time, practicing that. There's so much I can say about that, but I won't. Just experiment with it. And we're going to get to this, but brilliant hack. And again, this is a newer part of IFS I've learned is updating the age. I had always done that, but now I see it's almost 5 FEs. People in the workbook, I think they talk about doing it up here. So let me talk that out a little bit because it's such a powerful piece and it's such a quick, easy thing you can start incorporating if you haven't already. Let's say here you got some protector part and they're not trusting you or whatever the deal is. It's kind of stalling out. You can check out, does this part know how old you are? And if the answer is no, take a moment, see if the part's open to learning how old the client actually is. We're talking biological, chronological age. And once that part's updated, there is something very clarifying about that, where the part sees more who they're dealing with in the present moment, and they feel much more reassured and taken care of. We'll get into this more later, but a kind of more fleshed out way to play around with this is, how old does this part think you are? And they usually say a name, an age that's in between the present age and the age of the part. And what you've just done there is you've identified like a babysitter. And usually it's a firefighter. Not always. But then you can address that part. And now you let both the parts know that Susie's here now, and Susie's 38 years old, and they just relax. It's really powerful. All that to say, that's how you might use that earlier on. But I almost always, when I'm doing the retrieval and the part's like, yeah, we'll come with you, this is how I go through that. I almost always have them bring the part to their current home, let them check it out, and then at whatever point, sometimes introduce the family and pets. That can be very powerful. Pets can be very healing for people. And introductions, the home, and then would this part like to know how old you are? Very important to do. It's just so much bang for your buck. It's one simple question. Again, if you haven't been using that one, play around with it. Let me just say one other quick thing about the kind of the age update thing. This is kind of an aside to it, but another question that's really powerful, and it's in the table, is how aware of you is the part? That's more up here and here. You play around with that one too. It's a good one. All right, let's keep going.
I have a question.
After I answer Cherie's question.
But it may be a question for another time. It's kind of
sure.
Not sure.
Throw it out there and we'll see.
Okay, so the question is, I have worked with clients before where you've updated them, you've had them come with you, they've come to your apartment and seen what it looks like, and they've been disappointed.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you do with that?
Absolutely.
And I know the answer, but I just thought it's important.
Cherie, I'm curious. Well, how would you answer that question?
I'd rather have you answer.
Okay. All right. I want to hear your answer later.
Okay.
Fundamentally, my initial response is just to validate that, like just to let them grieve. Whatever it is they might be disappointed around. And that, I think that's just really important to do. Always. Paul Ginter, I named him earlier, ironically, is one of the footnotes I was able to name. He talked about, when I assisted the PA with him, he talked about how he thought every trauma has grief. Every trauma has loss. It could be the loss of what we wished would have happened, the loss of what we expected to have happen. We have so many desires, expectations, and potential. Sometimes life is disappointing. And so, yeah, if that's where they land, you just have to honor that, let them grieve it, and then just go from there and see how that plays out. That's the main thing I would do. Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, does it mean maybe there's another part there and do address that? But nothing's really coming to me. I think I would just always honor feelings. Always honor feelings. Just one quick thing on that note. A big part of IFS, the way we work, is we talk about trailheads. Trailheads essentially lead to the exiles. And at the beginning of the trailhead, we might have a lot of protector parts. It's a beautiful metaphor, very clear metaphor for this kind of work. And the way I think about this work, like what I'm scanning for, the question earlier about what if there's a whole bunch of parts, which ones do you go to? For me, if I'm making my guess, and again, I check it out with the clients, but I'm most interested in the emotions. I'm most interested in that kind of energy. And that's a whole nother conversation later. It gets into conscious heart integration and kind of how I have come to think about this beyond IFS, but that's for another time. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, where are we? Unburdening. All right, so let's say you got them in the safe place, but eventually, hopefully, the present moment home. That's my bias. Unburdening. This is huge. So there's at least two schools of thought about how we process things. When we're here in the witnessing phase, it's more catharsis, essentially. You are experiencing it more. You're kind of re-experiencing things to a degree. I don't think usually just as much, but sometimes just as much. And this is, I never came across this until IFS. When people are in safe spaces, so there's the external safe space, but here intrapsychically we're getting these parts to a safe place, it can be a completely different process where people are able to simply release, and there's no catharsis. That's not always possible, but it's definitely a whole lot more possible when they're in an environment where people get them and they feel safe and there's trust. And so so you just kind of cue this up. You got them in the safe place. Is there anything this part's carrying? And sometimes I'll flush it out this way: feelings and or beliefs that it would like to get rid of. And then this, I believe, was from Tony Irvine Blank, or that isn't a part of who this part really is. This works obviously much more along the lines of releasing when you're dealing with beliefs. And a lot of the work you end up doing here, now we're putting on, our CBT roles and our Byron Katie toolbox. And is it true? No. What's more true? And you just do that work. This is just one of the most beautiful places to weave in CBT type of interventions. And sometimes they can unburden certain feelings, like shame especially, which might be very tied to having certain beliefs. So much more we can say about this. We'll flesh it out more in the table below. I think that's good for unburdening. Okay, then next step, Dick used to talk about how, I think he got this from some physicist, I'm guessing, nature abhors a vacuum. So you get rid of this stuff, it can be really good to replace it with something. So I don't know, this might be a little superstitious, but if you only unburden, like, it makes it more possible for this old stuff to come back in. I don't think that's true necessarily, but it's a really beautiful opportunity to say, hey, what would this part like to reclaim that may have gotten lost along the way? And I like to add in, because I see so much of this in terms of developmental psychology, and or give more space for anything that didn't get a chance to fully develop. Sometimes I'm going to give, do I go into this? Why not? Just a very kind of salient example of this is when you're unburdening. Sometimes people feel like they're carrying like almost parts of other people. And this gets into introjects and Gestalt interventions, which we'll get into a little bit here. So I think it's just so easily complementing IFS. But sometimes it actually feels like, I've been carrying the energy of this abusive, let's say, boyfriend, and it feels like they took my innocence. They took my power. They took my voice. Sometimes that's how people feel it, that it actually got taken from them. And just a quick aside, innocence is always a really common and powerful thing to check in with. Just setting the stage here and there for people to bring back their innocence, or to reclaim or uncover their innocence. But all that said, now you're safe. This anger or this hate you took on from the abusive boyfriend, how would it feel if there's any left to send it back? Oh, that'd feel great. And sometimes when I know, we're explicitly working with the relationship, I will ask, does it feel like in that relationship anything got taken from you? And oftentimes the answer is yes. So, okay, great. How would it feel to reclaim your innocence, to bring back your voice, to bring back your power? Those are really common ones. So that's a more kind of specific version of inviting, but it can really just be any kind of self-led quality or really obvious qualities. I see things like spontaneity, playfulness. Again, innocence is such a big one. Tenderness, open-heartedness, the kind of things that you might see. Okay, and then last but not least, you've done all this fantastic work with your exiles after doing really good safety checks and some contracts with the protector parts, why not bring these protector parts in? What you know, probably every psychotherapist knows, the more you just understand about your client, like we all just kind of fall in love with these people and just experience so much care. The same thing's happening for the protector parts. So almost always these folks shift. These parts are already shifted. So if you have the time at this point, bring them back in, and you can just have them check it out. You know, what is it like now? You know, how are you feeling towards these parts we worked with? You know, protector part, how do you feel now? You can use that question. And that could be so healing. You know, you've got who knows how many years of this war, top dog, underdog war. And now these parts doing a 180, feeling all sorts of compassion. You know, give that a little bit of space and time if you can. So you flesh that out to whatever degree. But then what's really amazing, and in my experience, this gets to helping people, I think, literally restructure their personalities. I imagine this is one of the reasons why Dick does not really have a lot of use or talks about personality disorders. We've all got probably traits here and there, but the thing is that it's workable. And here, literally, you can start, even if it's a bit of a slow process, but sometimes it's not. Having these parts shift into 180-degree roles of what they used to be doing, I would argue more into their whole self and what was more meant for them. So again, this I think was from Tony. Could have certainly got it from Dick, but I remember Tony using this. What was this part really meant to do? Explicitly said or implied, now that this pain is healed. Pretty straightforward, and they'll share it. You know, you can take a little bit of time to just have them really feel into that. You know, how does it feel to step into this new role? Yeah, I'll just pause it there because I know we've been going a while, but with any of this, I could go on and on. But there might be some questions. Yes, Miss Cherie.
Just the last thing.
Yes.
Is it important for you to thank the parts at the end of your session?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Great point. So yes, it's kind of the last thing I do almost always, but I could just say always. I remember to do this. Oftentimes when people do this kind of inner work, their eyes are closed, you know, they're very internal. So I will say something along the lines of, you know, can you take a moment just to appreciate these parts, thanking them for all this hard work that they've done over the years, and for their willingness to trust you in exploring some of these changes, something along those lines. And then, you know, and when you feel complete with that, let yourself come back into the room nice and gently, is typically how I phrase it.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. I really appreciate, well, Cherie, I really appreciate you.
I appreciate
in
you.
So many ways.
You're amazing.
You're amazing. I really appreciate.
This was amazing.
Well, good. I'm glad I'm making sense. Maybe I never quite know because I was told I was too much, and sometimes I've been incoherent. It's true. I really want to thank those of you who had the bandwidth to show up in person. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for taking the time to learn this model. I feel very passionate about just helping therapists get better. Delene's here. She's known me forever, and she knows, and she's part of this tribe. I've always just been really committed to making the world a better place for kids. Not being treated that well, not so much me. I kind of got off easy, but watching my siblings go through some of what they went through, it kind of wrecked me in a way. And so this work just is so aligned with what I want to try and help change. And so it means a lot to me to not really just not be alone in it and have people like all of you helping. So, all right, let's end here. Again, thank you, everyone. And for those of you who can make it, we'll see you next week.